want a sound check? Okay.
Yeah, what I just wasn't sure was whether she was just telling me the number of inspectors and whether those, because we'd originally asked for 20 more, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Plus, I don't have a division here, do I? No, okay.
Well, good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. Thank all of y'all for being here this morning and for being at our hearing to discuss FDA's FY15 budget request. As I've mentioned on all the previous budget hearings that we've had thus far, the subcommittee is conducting its work with three primary themes in mind. Number one, ensuring the proper use of funds through the committee's oversight responsibility. ensuring that the appropriate level of regulation to protect producers and the public, which will be number 2. Number 3, ensuring that taxpayer funds are targeted to the most vital programs. We'll be reviewing FDA's budget this morning and in light of these themes as we move forward. I would like to welcome to the subcommittee this morning Dr. Margaret Hamburg, who is the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. Also having join us today is Mr. Bill William Tootle, who is the Director of the Office of Budget, FDA, and Mr. Norris Cochran, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Department of Health and Human Services. So welcome all of you, and we're glad to have you here this morning. I think everyone in this room, or anyone that's even viewing this hearing this morning, whether it be on C-SPAN or otherwise, would be touched or touched some way by FDA. If not today, they will be tomorrow. The agency's works from the food safety to the safety of cosmetics to human drugs plays a critical role in our health and welfare. And I believe I can speak for all of us that are here at the dais and all those that will be joining us as the dais as we get started this morning, that we appreciate your service, your dedication, and all those that you work with at FDA. Most of the public and many of our colleagues here in Congress are often surprised to learn that FDA regulates 20 to 25% of every consumer dollar spent on products in the United States. Your work can contribute to saving lives on one hand, and on the other hand, your regulatory decisions can mean the life or death to a business across the nation and the world. The extensive involvement of FDA is in so many aspects of our daily life, and the economy as a whole carries both benefits and risk. Because of your agency's influence on so much of our personal and professional lives, it is incumbent upon this subcommittee to ensure that FDA is making sound financial and regulatory decisions throughout the year, and not just over the course of the next few hours here this morning. FDA's responsibilities have grown over the past few years through global marketplace and by the way of congressional action. Congress has passed 4 major pieces of legislation during President Obama's time in office. Number 1, the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act of 2009. Second, the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011. Third, the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act of 2012. And the Drug Quality and Security Act of 2013. Your FY15 budget request contains increases associated with 2 out of the 4 of these broadened activities: food, safety, and drug compounding. Congress has responded by providing FDA with increased funding over this time, as well as to a degree that very few agencies have experienced. The year before President Obama came to office, FDA had a budget of authority of about $1.72 billion, with about 7,844 full-time equivalent positions. The appropriations Congress provided in January of FY14 included $2.6 billion and 10,325 FTE positions for FDA. This is an increase of 49% in funding and 32% in personnel. When factoring the authorized user fees into this number, FDA's funding has increased by 93% over this time period. FDA is requesting $4.74 billion for FY15, of which $2.58 billion is in discretionary budget authority and $2.16 billion is in user fees. The request includes new user fees for food imports and food inspection and facility registration once again. In total, FDA is requesting $260 million in new fees, but has failed to gain support from the stakeholders most impacted by such fees, the regulated food industry. The authorizing committees have not authorized the fees, and I see little chance that would happen during this Congress. We can continue to debate whether or not FDA needs more funding, but my colleagues and I need to be convinced that the FDA is utilizing its current resources in the most efficient ways to get the job done. On a related note, we continue to have concerns that FDA may be taking too long on issues right now without finishing some of the critical health matters that's currently on its plate. There are things that this Congress has specifically mentioned in our FY14 explanatory statement, such as a seafood advisory for pregnant women and sunscreen ingredients. We are well aware that Congress has limited discretionary dollars to go around. While it may look like we're doing our job by providing the FDA with ever more funds to match the ever-growing demands, we need to be absolutely sure that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely and resources are directly linked to the tangible results that we see. So at that, I would like to ask my ranking member, Mr. Farr from California, if he has any open remarks, and would recognize him at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I echo your remarks about the size of this agency and the responsibility. And I just want to personally thank you and praise you for your leadership. I know that it's been through some really difficult times, particularly with sequestration and budget cuts. But one area that I really think you don't get the appreciation that you should is that you've been the strongest advocate for the stewardship of medical countermeasures. And I think you've really done a great job in setting up and making this country better prepared for medical crisis and pandemics that may occur in the future. And I want to thank you for your leadership that doesn't get the recognition it should. I think we're probably going to have a much more optimistic and smoother budget process this year than we did last year. But I don't think we should forget the turmoil of sequestration and the shutdown in 2014. And sometime I'd really like to hear maybe this is more of a question, but I'd like to hear your opinion of the impact of these two events on FDA in terms of what it really did for public health, what opportunities we lost by the shutdown and sequestration, and how it affected this, as the chairman talked about, the large employee morale that the agency has. You have a big agency, but you also have a bigger responsibility, and I think that as you are the first responder to so many of the crises in America, that we need to make sure that the morale and well-being of the FDA is in great shape. So I look forward to your testimony. I thank you for your leadership and with the agency. And again, thank you for coming out. As Secretary came out to my district, you think of FDA as just being drugs, but it's also food. And the food that my district produces is essentially what's in a salad. And if you think about lettuce and things like that, I mean, most foods you cook, and that cooking process is the ultimate, what they call kill stop. And, you know, any bacteria or anything in that gets killed in the cooking process. Well, you don't cook lettuce, and you don't necessarily cook most of the other ingredients in the salad. So we have to find a process in growing that makes sure that the food's safety. And I think she was really struck by the amount of care we go into. You have to dress up to go into the fields just like you dress up to go into an operation room. You have to have your hands covered and gloves covered, your beards, your hair covered. You can't have any jewelry on. You can't have anything. You can't chew any gum. Can't take anything into the fields. And I think the fact that you came and saw that left a really strong impression with the growers who haven't had much contact with the FDA, to have you out there walking in their shoes, and I just appreciate that you took time to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Farr. Again, welcome, all of you. Dr. Hamburg will now turn to you for your opening statement. Bear in mind that your full statement will be included in the record, so feel free to summarize any main points, and then we'll proceed with the questions. Let me just bear in mind that, say that we will have votes at some point. We're expecting votes probably in around 10:50. It's always subject to change, as you know, but we will do a recess to go cast votes, and then we'll reconvene after that. So, but we'll at least go for probably 45 minutes before we have to be called for a vote. So we'll let you know. And so again, thank you for being here. We look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, Chairman Adderholt and members of the subcommittee. And thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the FDA's fiscal year 2015 budget. I also do want to thank the subcommittee for your past investments in FDA. Your unflagging support for our work to protect and promote the health of the public, even in these challenging budgetary times, is deeply appreciated. FDA's mission is vast, as the chairman noted. We are tasked with ensuring the safety, effectiveness, and quality of human and animal drugs, biologics, medical devices, and other medical products, as well as the safety of the blood supply and the safety and wholesomeness of some 80% of our nation's food supply. We also work to foster scientific innovation that will lead to tomorrow's new, better, and safer products. And more recently, we've been asked to regulate the manufacture, marketing, and distribution of tobacco products. And today, FDA is challenged by ever more complex challenges, requiring the agency to stay apace or ahead of scientific and technological developments that are driving product development and innovation. And we're challenged as well by globalization, not only the increasing volumes of imported goods, but the complexity of their supply chains, all of which increase both the potential risks and the benefits for American consumers. I'm happy to report that last year, FDA moved forward on many fronts to address these and other challenges. We took major steps towards implementing the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, which would enable FDA to build a modern, prevention-focused food safety system, protecting Americans against foodborne illness from both domestic and foreign sources. We approved novel medical products in cutting-edge areas of science and addressing critical unmet medical needs. We made progress in tackling drug shortages. And working with members of Congress and industry, we reached agreement on an approach to pharmacy compounding and set a timeline for a national track and trace system for prescription drugs that, when fully implemented, will further bolster the safety of the drug supply chain. Looking ahead to next year, FDA is requesting a budget of $4.74 billion for fiscal year 2015, and this represents a modest increase of 8% or $358 million to fund our highest priorities. In 2015, proposed and current user fees account for 46% of our total budget request, with budget authority dollars comprising the rest. We are, of course, mindful of the larger pressures on the federal budget, and so our request focuses on our most urgent needs: the safety of medical products, including compounded drugs, and safety of our food supply. And we're also asking for small increases for infrastructure needs. More specifically, the fiscal year 2015 budget provides a program level of $2.6 billion, which is $61 million above the fiscal year 2014 enacted level, to continue core medical product safety activities across FDA programs. FDA will continue to fund medical product safety in many critical domains, including one that I know is a major priority for the chairman, Mr. Rogers, which is addressing the misuse, abuse, addiction, overdose, and death from opioids, and we have many initiatives underway to address this very serious concern. Importantly, under the fiscal year 2015 budget, FDA will invest $25 million in budget authority to enhance pharmacy compounding oversight activities. I think you all recall the 2012 fungal meningitis outbreak that killed 64 people and infected over 750 others in 20 states. And that really demonstrated the critical need for improved oversight of pharmacy compounding. To better protect the American people, FDA stepped up activities within available resources, and Congress then passed the Drug Quality and Security Act, DQSA, in November 2013, giving us new responsibilities and authorities, but without commensurate resources. FDA's 2000 budget also requests an increase of $263 million for food safety, including resources to continue implementing FSMA. Implementation will ultimately reduce instances of foodborne illness, such as those seen recently as a result of E. coli 0157 contamination of prepackaged salads, salmonella and listeria contamination of cheese products, and listeria contamination in cantaloupe. Implementation will also minimize the market disruptions and economic costs that are inflicted by illness outbreaks and significant contamination incidents. Let me be clear, while FDA will still be able to issue the FSMA rules without increased funding, it will be unable to effectively implement these important rules and to reduce or prevent these types of serious incidents. New resources are required in critical areas of activity: training, the provision of guidance and technical assistance to industry and growers, as well as our partnerships with state agencies, both training and resources to really create an integrated food safety system, which is so key, and of course, building the modern import safety system that Congress mandated. So in conclusion, in my view, the FDA is a unique and essential agency, as Chairman Adderholt noted in his opening remarks, and our budget represents a real bargain for taxpayers, in fact. While the products we regulate account for more than 20% of every consumer dollar spent on products in the U.S., individual Americans pay a scant 2 cents a day to support our work. This is a small price to pay for life-saving medicines approved as fast or faster than anywhere in the world, a food supply that is among the safest in the world, and confidence of the American public in the vast array of essential products that they rely on each and every day. So I appreciate your interest and your support, and I thank you for this opportunity to talk with you this morning, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to talk a little bit about the FSMA budget request and the progress in food safety. I mentioned in my open remarks that FDA had received substantial increases for food safety over the past few years. The FY15 budget asked for another $24 million, as we discussed, a new budget authority for the implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act. In addition to the budget authority request, you have requested approximately $260 million in proposed user fees. The justification is a bit slim on the details, but as I mentioned, it does mention a few broad categories associated with the $24 million request, including standard setting, technical support for FSMA implementation, training, federal state integration, risk assessment. The question that I have is, if the committee were to approve the $24 million in new budget authority, can you give us details for the subcommittee on how the money would be spent in each of these areas without duplication, and why such funds would be necessary since the final rules will be delayed for another year?
Well, as I think you know, the Food Safety Modernization Act is really a landmark piece of legislation that calls on the FDA to really transform our food safety system, to transform it into one that reflects the realities of modern life, including globalization and the importance of imports, and also to shift our focus to one that emphasizes prevention of problems before they occur rather than responding after the fact, which is, of course, good for industry and good for consumers and health. At the time the law was passed, the CBO estimated that we would need about $580 million above our baseline in 2010. We have, as you noted, gotten some budget increases since the passage of the Food Safety Modernization Act, but we are still not anywhere near those numbers that CBO put forward. We did our own assessment and came out at a somewhat lower number, but as noted in the report that the Secretary provided to Congress last year, you know, we still need about $400 million in order to really implement all of the new mandates and authorities in FSMA. So it is a huge agenda. We believe that we can make really critical progress forward in implementing the Food Safety Modernization Act, but that fiscal year 2015 and the following year, 16, are going to be absolutely critical for that implementation. We have moved forward and published the proposed rules in the 7 critical areas for implementation, but now those rules will be finalized in 2015, but we need to begin now to hire on the new people, to begin the training, to begin the work with the states and extend the work with the states for the integrated system, to continue the critical outreach so that we can make this law as effective and efficient as possible. And so the budget authority request to you, you know, is really a small piece of what will be needed to fully realize the goals of this important legislation. And the President's request, of course, did include user fees. We've been working with industry and gotten indications of support for user fees, but I think you're right. The realities are that is a heavier lift, and that it will take time to actually make such a program a reality. So we are really hoping that Congress will understand the critical nature of this law, these new authorities and responsibilities, and the opportunity we have to continue to improve food safety and the health and well-being of Americans, and also to support industry so that we can prevent problems rather than have industry suffer unnecessary and preventable costs, as well as the human health costs associated with this.
On page 39 of the FY15 Congressional Justification, FDA projects that the level of food safety activity in the field for FY13, FY14, FY15, after years of investment in food safety and the administration's assumption that they would receive $24 million in new funds and more than $230 million in user fees, why would the agency show zero progress in domestic or import testing or inspections?
I am not sure what you're referring to, but we have quite significantly enhanced our inspectional activities, including overseas. We actually met the target for FSMA for overseas inspections in the last year. We continue to have a very high volume of testing as well, and we have begun, as part of FSMA and our routine food safety activities, work in a number of critical areas of capacity building and training, domestically and internationally, that will benefit the American public in terms of enhanced food safety.
We may come back to that, but let me, since my time is running short, let me go ahead and ask this. As we've said, the committee cannot authorize user fees, and I think user fees legislation is virtually impossible. And if you agree, why, and you pretty much said you agreed with that, why is the administration continue to propose user fees of $169 million for imported food and user fees of $60 million for food facility inspection registration to implement FSMA, when the administration has no plan to work with the industry on these fees?
Well, we have been working with industry, but it is a process. We have seen on the other side of the FDA House, in the drug and medical device area, the real benefits of user fees over a period of time. It took time to get those user fees in place and then time to get the programs really working, but it has enhanced efficiency and predictability that has been very important to industry, and I think that those industries now are supportive and true partners with respect to user fees. We are working on the food side, but in the meantime, we have an important set of programs to implement, and it is a concern in terms of, will we be able to get the full dollar amounts that we need to implement FSMA in the way that Congress really asked us to. But we are working with industry. We certainly have gotten good input and advice about how to structure user fees in ways that would be meaningful, and we intend to continue those discussions.
Okay, and lastly, for the record, not here, but just for the record, can you provide us with more detailed information on how the nearly $78 million provided over the last two fiscal years has been utilized?
Certainly.
Okay. Mr. Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your testimony, you mentioned the compounding reform that's going on, and I know that you're ramping up your oversight activities on large compounding facilities. But I'm concerned about the unintended consequences or the spillover to traditional individual independent pharmacies or drugstores. Are they going to be caught up in this net? And I mean, we need to keep the compounding manufacturers separate from the manufacturers, the large scale, from the little guys. And I wondered how you're going to assure the little guys, gals, that they're not going to be caught up in the big net.
Well, I think that compounding pharmacies, historically, traditional compounders, have been the responsibility of states to regulate. If you're a sort of corner pharmacy compounding, producing in response to a prescription for an individual patient, not marketing across state borders in high volumes, et cetera, that is really the domain of the state regulatory oversight. The law that was recently passed helped to clarify the FDA role in compounding pharmacy oversight, including ensuring a uniform approach across states, because there had been sort of a patchwork due to different circuit courts making different rulings on the 503A component of the compounding law as it applied to FDA. And then the new law created a new category of compounders called outsourcing facilities, where companies could choose to register with the FDA if they're producing certain high-risk injectable, sterile injectable products. They could register with us, be subject to our oversight, but I think really ensure a higher level of quality and consistency for the healthcare system and for patients. So we are taking on some new activities. We will continue to work in close partnership with the states as they regulate traditional compounders. But if the compounder really is a traditional compounder responding to individual prescriptions for specific patients and not producing in high volumes and marketing across state lines, et cetera, then I do not think that our activities will interfere with those compounders in any way, unless there was a serious problem and we were brought in to respond to a public health concern working in concert with
So is
the
there a
state.
general category? You mentioned the sterile injectables. Is it that category, the injectables that are more and doing interstate business that would be subject to this new regulation?
Yeah, the sterile injectables, of course, represent a higher risk, and it was that kind of a product that was involved in the fungal meningitis outbreak in 2012. And in the law that Congress recently passed, it was identified that a category would be created, outsourcing facilities, where compounding pharmacies that were making these higher risk products that chose to register with us could register with us. They would then be subject to our oversight, but they would be able to produce, I think, as I said, a product that would be safer and more reliable in terms of healthcare system needs and patient protection.
And I understand that to accommodate this new responsibility that you have, that you're going to shift $25 million from other FDA programs. And what are you shifting it from? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Well,
how's that going to affect other compounders, or what other programs that you're taking the money away from?
Well, of course, we would prefer to have all new money, but recognizing the realities of the budget environment that we're in, this is such an important area, and this is a new program focus that needs to be adequately supported. We have taken on more responsibilities in terms of routine and for-cause inspections of compounding pharmacies, as well as this new responsibility as outlined in the legislation.
Who do you take the money from?
So the money is going to come from, because unfortunately GSA has been defunded to do construction in fiscal year 15 that is part of our consolidation on the White Oak campus of FDA people and facilities in the greater Washington area. We can, without robbing from Peter to pay Paul, take $15 million, I believe it is, to support the compounding pharmacy program, and then we will find efficiencies in other areas to help support the rest of this. But this is such an important program, and I think the entire agency agrees that we need to find ways to make sure that we have the resources to support this new compounding pharmacy.
So it comes from your capital outlay program.
A big chunk of it does. Money that was going to go to outfitting new buildings, but those buildings are not going to be part of the GSA construction budget, as it turns out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We got the Chairman Rogers from the Chairman of the Full Committee is here with us this morning. I'd like to recognize him now for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Dr. Hamburg, to the subcommittee again, along with your staff. It's good to see you. We've had many conversations about prescription drug abuse. I chair that caucus in the House, and because my district really was the ground zero, I guess, of the OxyContin craze that went on a dozen or so years ago. When Purdue Pharma started pumping out OxyContin in the late 1990s and early 2000s, it was billed as the next wonder drug. It was intended to treat pain over a 12-hour time release period, but it's caused incalculable pain and death in the form of addiction and overdose. In fact, when it's crushed, so it can be snorted or injected to create that euphoric high, condensing a 12-hour dose into a split second, became extremely addictive, especially for young people. And what was once sequestered in the small towns of southern and eastern Kentucky, where I live, is now characterized by the Center for Disease Control as a national epidemic. We've all heard the figures, more people dying from prescription drug abuse than car wrecks, for example. So it is a national epidemic, and it continues. But I have to say that I appreciate your leadership on this issue. I've personally spoken with every commissioner before you about the need for changes at the federal level to stem the rising tide of prescription drug abuse, and my requests had fallen on deaf ears. You've certainly heard the call. Keeping crushable, generic OxyContin off the street, upscheduling hydrocodone combination drugs, and ensuring that powerful painkillers are indicated for severe pain only. These were clearly steps in the right direction. And that's why I'm so totally perplexed, as you and I have talked, about your decision just the other day to approve Zohydro, a crushable, pure hydrocodone product, last November. Hydrocodone is already the most abused drug in the country, and there's been a bipartisan outcry that this is a step in the wrong direction. In Kentucky, we saw users switch from OxyContin to Opana in droves when OxyContin was reformulated to where it could not be crushed or injected or smoked. And we saw users switch from Opana to heroin when Opana was reformulated. Given those well-noted patterns, Dr. Hamburg, how can you say with any degree of confidence that Zohydro will not be abused or diverted for illicit use, particularly when your own advisory panel cited its addictive qualities and they voted 11-2 against approval? And yet you went ahead. After all the other problem drugs had reformulated to prevent crushing, And you and your agency had said that, I think in so many words, we will not approve any drug that does not contain a abuse deterrent feature like crushing, non-crushing. And yet you approved Zohydro. Could you explain that to us?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your critical leadership on this important public health issue over so many years. I understand the concern and confusion that you have and agree that Zohydro is a very powerful drug. It was assessed within the FDA in terms of trying to balance legitimate medical needs for pain treatment with, of course, safety concerns that include addiction potential. We feel that Zohydro is important in terms of medical needs of patients living with severe pain that requires long-term daily opiate treatment for which no other treatment is adequate, but that it needs to be responsibly used. That is why, after the advisory committee met, they did note the value of the drug. Why it has particular value is that other hydrocodone opiate drugs are in combination with acetaminophen that carries with it significant liver toxicity, and different patients respond to different opiate drugs differently. If you're having chronic treatment, your response to one opiate drug may wane, so that there needs to be a rotation. And the fact that this drug could be available with appropriate use without the concomitant toxicity of acetaminophen, which does create a very serious, potentially devastating risk to patients, made it really quite unique. With respect to the concern, let me say that we listened carefully, of course, to the advisory committee, their recognition of the legitimate need for such a drug in terms of medical care, but safety concerns around addiction potential. We did not approve Zohydro until we had made labeling changes that really focused on the need for it to be used with severe pain, the need for practitioners to make sure that this was the right drug for their patient, to monitor it in an ongoing way, and also put in place requirements on the manufacturer for ongoing studies about its appropriate use versus misuse or abuse. It's also Schedule 2, which brings with it a range of additional protections, including no refills and a limited volume at the time of prescription, and then security requirements around its storage and monitoring and record keeping. And of course, it has a black box warning and a REMS, including recommendations of physicians who prescribe it to take a training course on appropriate use. So we've tried to put in place protections that will better ensure appropriate use. With respect to abuse deterrence, and I apologize for my long answer, but it's a complicated set of issues, there is only one opiate drug in the marketplace now with an approved abuse deterrent formulation. The science of abuse deterrence, the technology of it, really is not fully evolved. We wish that every product could have an abuse deterrent formulation, but it really simply does not exist. And as you know, the determined abuser finds ways to overcome many strategies. So we are trying to incentivize industry. We recently put out guidance on how to develop abuse deterrent formulations. We're trying to engage the broader scientific community to work on this. We hope that we will be able to have more and more products in the marketplace with abuse deterrence, but we're not there yet.
I thought we had learned our lesson with OxyContin. It had labeling restricting its use. But as you say, determined abusers are going to find the drug, one way or the other. And until OxyContin was made non-crushable, a jelly-like thing that could not be abused, until that happened, OxyContin went crazy, even though doctors were only supposed to limit it to people with moderate to severe pain. To say that Zohydro, which I understand is much more powerful than OxyContin and gives a greater high than OxyContin did when crushed, to say that we can keep the abusers from using that pill because we'll put a label on it saying only for severe pain. We learned that lesson with OxyContin. It don't work. And you're going to have people die. Boy, when OxyContin was at its height, I was going to emergency rooms all the time in my district and seeing young people die from overdoses, not knowing many cases that it was so powerful and addictive. And most of it's coming from medicine cabinets in people's homes that kids get into. And Zohydro, I'm afraid, will be the same way. So I'm really alarmed, especially since the company that makes it says that it'll be ready to release an abuse deterrent pill in just 2 years. They're in the process of making that pill non-crushable, and it'll be available shortly. But in the meantime now, you're putting this pill on the market that I'm really scared of. It's not a question, it's more a statement.
Well, I appreciate your concerns. We want to continue to monitor this drug and other opiate drugs in terms of appropriate use. This is something that I think is a critical area in terms of FDA activities, whether it's in moving towards trying to better develop the abuse deterrent technologies, which really, I mean, the crushable, as you know, does not stop the determined abuser, and we are not where we need to be in terms of that formulation. Importantly, we are putting a huge emphasis working with industry to try to develop non-opioid analgesics, painkillers that won't have addictive potential, and I think there's huge opportunity there. And of course, working in other ways in terms of developing better treatments for addiction.
But why couldn't you just waited for a few months until that company makes this pill non-crushable?
You know, it isn't clear whether they will be able to come up with a successful abuse deterrent formulation. Opana tried to and failed. Others have tried to and failed. We believe that the science and technology is advancing so that we will have better abuse deterrent formulations, but right now it doesn't do any good to hope that something that a company may say is abuse deterrent if it fails the fundamental tests.
Well, you and all of us forced Purdue Pharma to make OxyContin reformulate to make it abuse deterrent. Did the same thing with Opana. So we've taken care of the problem as it rose its head until now.
But it actually turned out that the Opana abuse deterrent formulation really failed to meet the criteria for abuse deterrence. And sadly, you know, we're receiving reports that the other formulation can be, while it prevents immediate injection or snorting, that there are ways to overcome the deterrence, and of course it over a longer period of time, and it doesn't prevent oral abuse from continuing as well. So it's an imperfect solution, but it is the best we have.
Well, your advisory council voted
11 to 2.
11 to 2. Thank you. Voted 11 to 2 to not approve Zohydro. The medical community is having very strong reservations about introducing this drug. The American Society of Interventional Pain Physicians recently endorsed the bill that I introduced along with Congressman Lynch to ban Zohydro. So you're swimming upstream here in a very dangerous current, I think. But I appreciate and respect your capabilities. I appreciate your fight on prescription drug abuse all along here, and we look forward to victories over
But we
this
will
problem.
continue to work with you, to work very hard to address, what is a shared public health goal.
And I
of
appreciate your
reducing-
coming to appear in Atlanta in April at the National Summit on Prescription Drug Abuse, as you did the last 2 years. So thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I've overstepped my time, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being here. Also, we have the ranking member. Honored to have her with us today for the hearing. And so, Ms. Lloyd, we'd like to recognize you.
And I'd like to thank Chairman Adeholt, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Farr, and it's a special pleasure to welcome Commissioner Hamburg. In her time at the FDA, Dr. Hamburg and I have had the pleasure of working on a number of issues together, and I'm pleased that under her leadership, the FDA has advanced several of those efforts following years of delays under the previous administration, including implementing new labeling standards for both gluten-free products and sunscreen. The FDA has enormous responsibility to assure the safety, efficacy, and security of drugs, devices, the food supply, and cosmetics, and it's vital that the subcommittee provide it with adequate resources. First, let me ask you about sunscreen. As you know, I've been working on that for a very long time. Now, sunscreen products must include information on both UVA and UVB, the amount of time a product can protect while swimming or sweating, and can no longer use terms such as waterproof or sunblock. This was a great step forward, but there's still so much more that could be done to help consumers. According to the Environmental Working Group, sunscreens sold in Europe include up to 27 chemicals, including 7 designed to filter UVA radiation. Meanwhile, products sold in the United States can only use 17 chemicals approved by the FDA, only 3 of which screen UVA rays. The FDA hasn't approved a new ingredient since 1999. So if you could share with us what the FDA is doing to improve U.S. sunscreens. Does the FDA have the funds it needs to evaluate new sunscreen ingredients?
Well, thank you for your question. It's such an important topic. As you know, melanoma is a very serious killer in this country and a preventable disease. The rules that you mentioned have been important in advancing sunscreen protections for Americans, but we do need to make more progress with respect to the ingredients. And I think that there are a number of things that we are trying to do. We have created a dedicated team to work on the issue of ingredients, but it's a small number of people. And historically, these are some of the kinds of reviewers and scientists that have been stretched to cover many different issues and to work on competing priorities. But we're very focused on this ingredient issue and trying to go through the time and extent analyses that are required to enable us to put new ingredients into sunscreens. As you noted, there are 8 ingredients that are presently being looked at. We just went back to on 2 ingredients to ask for more information to demonstrate safety. We do feel that by really focusing on this and working more closely with industry, we hope we can get both better information from industry about what we need to make our regulatory decisions, and we can be more efficient. We also do think that the regulatory framework that we currently have, the legal regulatory process, is more cumbersome than it needs to be, and we'd like to be able to streamline that. And that includes not just the time and extent application process, but also the over-the-counter monograph process that it's sort of embedded in, which relates to a broader set of over-the-counter products. And we're actually taking a very hard look at that, including a public meeting, I think a 2-day meeting that began earlier this week, to really see what we can do there to strengthen our programs, to make them stronger and more efficient.
In your budget request, you are again proposing to raise a significant amount of money from food safety user fees. Michael Taylor, your top food safety expert, recently testified that these large increases are needed to implement the Food Safety Modernization Act. His exact words were, "We can put the rules on the books, but where we lack the resources and where the fees would be essential is in implementing the rules." Regardless of the arguments in favor of the proposal, I think it's safe to say that it is highly unlikely they will be authorized, even if we were to fully fund your discretionary appropriations request as we did for 2014. You are still short of what is needed for a vital service. Do you need more than the $24 million proposed increase you requested in discretionary funding for food safety?
To make the kind of progress that we want to make in terms of implementing the Food Safety Modernization Act and the new roles and responsibilities and authorities that Congress gave us to do something that I think is truly important for health and safety in this country, we do need the amount requested in the President's budget overall. I had mentioned, I think before you came in, that at the time the bill was passed, the CBO had actually estimated that we needed some $580 million over our fiscal year 2010 budget to really implement the Food Safety Modernization Act. We think we can do it more efficiently. We're committed to doing it more efficiently, and that there are important ways to leverage resources and find efficiencies, but we do need real dollars to undertake some of the critical components of this important new law, and that includes being able to hire and train the personnel needed, being able to work with the states and create the integrated food safety system that's really necessary to strengthen the state programs through training and capacity building, to provide technical assistance and guidance to industry to make this transition to a new prevention-based food safety system as meaningful and efficient as possible. And of course, really having to put in place a whole new system for food safety as it relates to imported foods.
With limited time, I'm just going to ask one more question, but I'm particularly interested in the imported food issue as well. The Congressional Research Service says that an estimated 60 to 70% of all U.S. processed foods probably contain some genetically engineered material because there is so much corn, soybeans in the processed foods we eat. I strongly believe that consumers have a right to know what they're eating. I know that FDA has said it supports voluntary labeling, but I would support mandatory labeling of foods as to whether they are genetically modified. Would you review for us how FDA currently approaches GE labeling?
Well, as you noted, we have supported voluntary labeling, and we put out a proposed guidance with respect to plant-based genetically modified foods, and we hope to finalize that soon. With respect to mandatory labeling, the way that over many, many years FDA has interpreted the law, and it's been supported by the courts, is that mandatory labeling, really is appropriate and required when there is a false claim or misbranding, that the fact that the food contains GE materials does not constitute a material change in the product unless, a material change meaning in the nutritional content, the performance of the food, the taste, the aroma, etc.
Are you convinced that's the case?
This is an area that obviously is very much on the minds of many Americans and the subject of a lot of discussion and some controversy. There have been, a lot of very credible scientific organizations that have looked hard at this issue over a long period of time. We have not seen evidence of safety risks associated with genetically modified foods in terms of health. Others have looked at environmental issues. It's an area that deserves further discussion and further study. We do think that a voluntary approach to labeling makes a lot of sense, because for people who have the desire to avoid GE foods, this would give them the opportunity to choose. But from a scientific and safety assessment point of view, we do not currently believe that the fact that there has been genetic modification of a food product makes it a material change to the product in terms of its nutritional or other qualities, unless, I mean, there are some instances, for example, if a genetic engineering approach introduced a potential toxin that wouldn't normally be in that food product, such as a peanut toxin into an oil or a tomato or whatever, then we would require labeling of the potential for exposure to this toxin, because that would be a material change that would create a health or safety concern.
Are there tremendous pressures on the FDA to keep it voluntary rather than mandatory? I mean, if people want to know, I can't understand why it can't be labeled accurately.
Well, I think there's a desire to operate within our legal regulatory framework in terms of when a mandatory label is appropriate versus a voluntary label, and that's what but it's an area, you know, of ongoing discussion, of course.
Isn't it problematic that many countries, in Europe in particular, do require accurate labeling?
Well, you know, Europe has a very different attitude towards
They wanna know
genetically
what they
modified
eat.
food. Their food safety agency, I think, has looked at the issue, and from a food safety point of view, you know, has issued reports that are more reflective of you know, what I was saying earlier. But the European people have made a determination that they really don't want genetically modified foods.
Well, I won't pursue this today, but it's beyond me that we can't have accurate labeling. And I do hope that we can pursue this. The labeling can't hurt anybody, but it's possible that the lack of adequate labeling could. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Loy. Mr. Nunley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Hamburg, for being here. Your testimony earlier this month for the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, you noted that the FDA's broader strategic effort to deal with increasing globalization of food and medical products that are regulated by the FDA. How's the FDA going to take into account the impact of the processing and clearance time for such food, medical products that are regulated by the FDA? Many of these are time critical and temperature sensitive, to make sure they're not held up and prevented from reaching their intended recipients in a timely fashion.
Well, of course, the global supply chain does complicate our lives in terms of just what you were saying, in terms of ensuring safety and quality, and it has required us to rethink and reorganize in critical ways. We recognize the importance of moving many of these commodities quickly because of their very nature, fresh fruit and produce, seafood, and other things. But we are trying to have a very systematic and thoughtful approach that will strengthen our screening at the borders in terms of using risk-based, highly data-driven, and computer-based systems that recognize the nature of the commodity and other circumstances, including the history of the manufacturer and the exporter and the importer, et cetera, and other factors that could contribute to the risk of a product, but really helping us to identify which are the things that require on-site physical inspection and which are the things that can move quickly through. And so that, I think, has been very important. A program called Predict is sort of the foundation of that. But we recognize that simply trying to screen things at the borders, when we have so many ports of entry for one thing, and the volumes of imports are increasing so dramatically and so rapidly, we need to push our presence beyond our borders, and we're working much more on a regional basis and an in-country basis to do both inspections and work with manufacturers where the food is being produced, work with our counterpart regulators to ensure that they understand our standards for food that will be consumed in America by Americans, and working with industry in those countries and regions, and of course multinational companies as well, to ensure adherence with standards. We're trying hard as well to harmonize standards and approaches across nations so that we can essentially better share information and workload, since we're not the only country that's struggling with how do you deal with increased volumes of imported food and these more complex supply chains. But the Food Safety Modernization Act has been very valuable in terms of giving us new authorities in terms of our global enterprise, and I would say we've made real progress, and importantly through partnership, including partnership with unexpected partners in some ways, such as the World Bank, to try to help enhance regulatory capacity in parts of the world that are producing many of these imported foods, but don't have the kind of regulatory capacity that's really necessary to ensure that they meet standards.
All right, I'm primarily interested in medical devices that
Okay.
are coming in. Is there room for improvement with your Predict computer modeling?
Yes, it certainly applies across product areas. It began with more of a focus on foods, and I apologize, I thought that was what your question really was. But also it applies to medical devices, which are increasingly being made in whole or in part in other countries. But they're really working with the manufacturers, with regulators in those other countries, and striving for this greater harmonization and information sharing and workload sharing, I think is going to be the most effective approach.
We're interested in making sure that if Americans need medical devices, they're not held up coming in.
Absolutely.
All right, recently the FDA held an advisory committee meeting on 3 parent embryos. And in the process, the FDA specifically said that you recognize there are issues that could have the potential to affect regulatory decisions issues relating to ethical and societal issues, but that these issues are outside the scope of your meeting. And as a result, you focused on how to create these 3 parent embryos as opposed to whether or not they should even be created. So my question is, when is it appropriate to have that debate? And shouldn't we talk about whether we should be doing this before we talk about how to do it?
Yeah, well, let me begin by saying that the 3-parent embryo was a newspaper headline, not exactly what this is, in the sense that this is a technology that's being developed to reduce mitochondrial diseases that are very devastating to the kids of mothers with these conditions. It's a technology that's developing, and it's being looked at not only in this country but in other countries. The purpose of this meeting was not, to move to the next stage of development and implementation, but to really better understand what the issues are, certainly where the science and technology is, and what are the potential benefits, what are the risks. But of course, we recognize that there is a broader set of ethical issues, and we would not move forward without making sure that those were addressed. FDA is not the proper agency to take on all of those issues, and we are exploring other venues for fuller discussion of those issues. But this, like many emerging technologies, is one that raises a complex set of challenges, both scientific and legal and ethical.
So when and who do we discuss these ethical issues?
Well, we are looking at, there are various kinds of options for how to have a fuller discussion of the ethical issues. I would suspect that Congress may take an interest in these as well. But we are intending to identify a forum to very specifically look at the ethical issues in the context of what this technology could be, what are the needs, what are the risks, and of course, what is the ethical context is critically important for that. And as I said, we're not the only country that is looking at this. And it certainly is, one of those frontiers of science and medicine that could offer opportunities, but also raises a set of, very, very serious issues.
All right, thank you,
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Ms. Hamburg. It's a delight to see you again. I congratulate you for your efforts to do a lot with few resources, and we continue to add responsibilities to you, and I hope that you will be able to manage those additional responsibilities with the resources that we provide. I want to call your attention to the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act. I'll call it FDASIA, which was signed into law July 9th of 2012. One of the most important elements of that was to apply the lessons learned from meeting the needs of people with HIV, AIDS, and cancer by using accelerated approval to fast-track therapies in the hands of patients who are otherwise facing certain death. In FDASIA, we directed FDA to make use of the same authority to address the urgent needs of orphan and rare disease populations. And I've heard from constituents as well as from scientists in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy community that there's a first potential therapy, I guess it's eteplirsen, in the pipeline that could, and in their view, should be considered for accelerated approval. Based on 120 weeks of data, there have been no adverse effects to patients and strong signs of efficacy. Top scientists who have dedicated their careers to this disease say they've never seen results like this. Just like people with HIV, AIDS in the 80s, right now children and young adults with Duchenne face certain death, and there's no therapy. And the longer that these patients wait, the more muscle function and mobility that they lose and capabilities that they will not be able to get back. FDASIA's orphan and rare disease provisions would seem to apply to a condition like Duchenne. Wouldn't you agree? And if so, what is the holdup, and when will FDA make a decision on how to proceed? And when can I tell my constituents that FDA is going to accelerate approval of eteplirsen for the treatment of DMD?
Well, this is a very important arena, both in terms of Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a devastating disease for the children and their families. And there are advances in science that really represent potential opportunities for transformation of the disease condition if we can really develop a drug that addresses the underlying mechanism of disease. We have had a very intensive interaction with both the manufacturer and the broader community around the development of new products in this area. I would say it's been one of the most remarkable engagements in some ways of senior level medical scientists within FDA and our review team. We are looking very closely at what are the best clinical trial designs. Certainly we want to find a way to understand the product and its benefits and any safety issues in as rapid a way as possible. I think we are making progress. Obviously I can't speak to the specifics of a particular product under development, but we are very, very committed. We are working hard on it, and as I said, there's been a huge amount of focus and engagement on this, and we hope a huge amount of opportunity to make a difference around this important disease.
Go back and really look at the potential for helping these people who are suffering with DMD from eteplirsen, I think is what it's called.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I can assure you that we are are deeply engaged and very committed to trying to find treatments, hopefully cures, for this devastating
Let me move
disease.
quickly to another food safety issue. I applaud the recent efforts to phase out the use of medically important antimicrobials in food and animals for production purposes, such as to enhance growth and improve feed efficiency, and to bring the therapeutic uses of such drugs to treat, control, and prevent specific diseases under the oversight of licensed veterinarians, particularly with the recent release of guidance number 213. It appears that you are, however, reinventing the wheel when it comes to your plan to collect antibiotic use data and conduct other research to better understand antimicrobial drug use practices in animals and the public health impacts on antimicrobial resistance. That's a quote. Particularly in light of, I think, the chairman's comments earlier about duplication. Isn't this a duplication of the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System, NARMS, which was established in 1996 as a partnership between FDA, the Centers for Disease Control, and USDA to track antibiotic resistance in foodborne bacteria?
Well, NARMS is an important tool that we have, but we think that we need to continue to build on it and extend it. There are advances in science that give us, for example, new tools. The ability to do whole genome sequencing, for example, can provide much greater insight into organisms, resistance patterns.
You can't do that under NARMS?
Spread. Well, we need to build on NARMS. We need to bring new aspects into it. And with respect to some of the data collection that I think you're referring to, we have historically looked at volumes of antibiotics sold for use in animal care settings. We think there's great value in drilling down a little bit into that data and not just how many tons of antibiotics are being used in feed, but for what kinds of animals and what kinds of purposes, et cetera. So I don't think we're duplicating effort. I think we're deepening, we're striving to deepen knowledge and understanding so that we can get the most meaningful answers, so that we can actually target our resources and our efforts in the best possible way to make a difference for both animal and human health.
It would seem as if you would want to target it, but if you were able to streamline and combine both of those into one, it should help you, but it should also help your budget if you're able to consolidate those efforts. Still drill down, but you already have NARMS as a basis to act on, which has been in existence since '96.
Well, it will remain an important framework, but we can and must do more, I think.
Mr. Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. Before I start, I want to extend my sympathy to the gentlelady from Connecticut in advance, because UConn's going to lose to Iowa State tomorrow night.
In your dreams, Mr.
Hey,
Latham.
come on. Whoa, Rosie. Okay. Ms. Lowy brought up a subject that I'm very concerned about, and the genetically modified. Just this Tuesday, we had a statue of Norman Borlaug put in Statuary Hall representing the state of Iowa. He saved 1 billion lives by genetically modifying wheat to make it grow in areas of the world where they could not produce an adequate supply of food. And the idea of somehow some characterization about what genetically modified food is, or some kind of an abstract reason for putting people through a whole bunch of hoops and hurdles to label that and not knowing what is in, I think is misguided myself. And as you said, there's no scientific basis for concern unless there is something that a toxin or something that's been introduced. Mr. Nunley's question about 3 parent children. Do we have to label them? Aren't they genetically modified? Wouldn't they be? Would they?
Well, they would be genetically modified.
Well,
yes.
But the same rationale. Maybe that's going obviously to the extreme, but I think we better be real careful about undermining the tremendous advances that have been made in supplying this world. We're going to have, what, 9 billion people on Earth here by 2050, and the way we're going to feed them is to improve plant varieties that are tolerant to diseases, tolerant to pesticides, which would make the use of pesticides much less a problem. So I just want to say we better be very, very careful. Get on another subject that's great concern to the state of Iowa and soybean producers. There's a process you put in place talking about soybean oil trans fats that it would not be generally recognized as safe, which to me is not correct. They've made huge advances, as you're probably keenly aware, as far as trans fats, reducing that by about 68% in the last 10 years. And I know the Soybean Association and interested parties have wanted to work with you. I don't know if you have any update as to regarding the regulatory process you're going through, and I hope there's a consideration of what the economic damage would be. You're going to be replacing that with imported products, palm oil from elsewhere around the world, and would have a huge impact as far as soybean production in this country.
Well, as you noted, we did take a preliminary regulatory action not too long ago in terms of whether trans fats were generally recognized as safe as a component of the food supply. The comment period for that just recently closed. We got about 1,600 comments, I believe, and very substantive comments on many aspects of it, including, some of the technical formulation issues when you're, producing certain kinds of food products, some of the economic issues, and of course, safety and public health issues, a whole range of comments. So we are reviewing those and obviously taking them very seriously. We expect we'll have some continuing discussions with the range of stakeholders who have an interest in this, trying to deepen our understanding before we would go forward with a final process. And, so we will obviously be as transparent as we can be in that process, and we certainly have heard some of the kinds of concerns that you have raised. And there would always be an avenue for companies to pursue in terms of petitioning us to demonstrate an appropriate use with science to support that use and a reasonable certainty of no harm from the ongoing use as a food additive. So there's that pathway, but there's also the continuing regulatory process that's underway.
Well, there's a lot of work being done as far as commercializing the high oleic soybean oil, and which would probably alleviate a lot of your concerns, but it's going to take a little more time. And certainly, I would hope that you'd be willing to work with the industry to make sure that we don't have the huge negative impacts that.
And I would applaud the industry for having already taken many steps forward to reduce unnecessary trans fats in the American diet through reformulations of food, which really began in 2006 when we asked for it to be listed on the Nutrition Facts panel. But huge progress has been made because we know it does contribute to health risk.
Mr. Chairman, I think in interest of the colleagues here, I've got some other questions, but thank you very much for the great communications, and appreciate all you do. So thank you.
Sure. If you want to submit those for the record, we'll be happy to include those. Mr. Lauro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. It's wonderful to have you here, and thank you for the great work of the FDA. Let me first, and I think Chairman Rogers would really not believe this, but I want to associate myself with the comments that he made on Zahydra, because I think it really is a recipe for serious disaster. To that end, the chairman, myself, and Mr. Lynch have just written to the IG asking for a report on looking at corporate pharmaceutical interests in the regulatory process. So again, we believe very, very sincerely that this is going to create more havoc and lead to people dying. And when we have an opportunity at this juncture to be able to turn it around, so I thank the chairman for his leadership in this effort. I also want to make a point that I think it would just taking a look at, and don't misunderstand this. The NASA budget, the request for this year is, I think, $17.8 billion. The FDA budget request is $4.7 billion. I like NASA. I'm happy for the things that they do, but the FDA regulates 20% of the consumer dollar. 20% of the consumer dollar. It's the request for this year between NASA and the FDA. NASA's 4 times what the FDA is looking for to implement, in large measure, the Food Safety Modernization Act, which we have demanded and said, do it. Now, that leads me, though, I think it's stunning when you take a look at the agencies and who's doing what, and critical necessities, but I think you have to evaluate food safety, public safety, life and death issues, you know, that are very important here. Anyway, my question, though, to you, Dr. Hamburg, is I really want to do, you said 580 was OMB. You're looking, I want to know what you need. We know here that user fees are fine, except that it's the 4th time in a row we're asking for user fees. And everybody believes that's not likely. So, what is the amount of money that you need in order to be able to carry out what we've asked you to carry out on food safety modernization? If from whatever source that we get this money from, what do you need to carry out this effort? That's a question that I have. And if we do not have the funds to do what you need to do, what are the consequences of that? Very seriously. And there may be some, I don't believe on this panel, that say, well, if it fails, it didn't work. But there are some who are of that view, but that's not what our view is here. What do you need in order to go forward? What do we lose if you don't get that money?
Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman DeLauro, for that question, and also I share your disbelief at times at the disconnect between how important and unique our agency is to the health and well-being of the American people and, you know, what we are, in fact, resourced to support our critical work. I think you were not in the room when I was asked an earlier question, and I committed to submitting to all of you an outline of what do we need and what would it be used for. Right. But I would just say that, you know, the request before you in terms of the overall budget number does reflect what we think we really need to do a meaningful next step in the implementation.
So we could give you this money in budget authority versus user fees.
You know, to me, frankly, money is money.
Well, to me, BA is more important than user fees because user fees come often with a price tag and a quid pro quo, and I'm tired of quid pro quo in these efforts. So,
I mean, I think BA. Congress has given us a set of very important and serious responsibilities to implement the Food Safety Modernization Act, which will matter for the health and lives of individuals and communities, and, frankly, for the health of industry. It will make all of us stronger. We can only do so much with limited resources, and we will provide you with.
Please get us what you need. And that set of circumstances, those who want to can advocate for that and make all of the contrast with other agencies which have a great mission, but not the same kind of mission for 20% of that consumer dollar that you have, so that we can fight for that money. And for my view is BA, versus the user fees. Insanity, they say, is described as repeating the same thing over and over and over again. How many times are we going to put this thing in for user fees, and then it just doesn't happen? So please be direct, clear, and to the point about what you need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Humberg, thanks for coming to our hearing today. Thanks for your efforts to protect consumer safety, ensure that we're getting good products to market that have been reviewed properly in an expedited fashion. I think we certainly share a lot of the same goals and appreciate your work at the FDA. I want to talk to you a little bit about some innovative technology that that has the potential to have some, I think, improve the health outcomes of millions of Americans. There's a significant and growing body of science that shows that the health risks associated with smoke-free tobacco products are significantly lower than the risks associated with cigarette smoking. Now, science on this is obviously still developing, and many public health experts think that the e-cigarette is an innovation that can help save the lives of smokers by helping them quit smoking altogether. In a recent piece in the New York Times, researchers from Columbia University said that, quote, research suggests that e-cigarettes may be better at helping to sustain smoking cessation than pharmaceutical products like nicotine patches or gums. Under Section 911 of the Tobacco Control Act, your agency will soon issue regulations to assert jurisdiction over the devices. What are your efforts in that regard? What are your thoughts in terms of the future of these e-cigarettes, and how will you work to ensure that your agency doesn't stifle this innovation that has happened around this category so that smokers may have access to what appears to be a less harmful alternative to smoking cigarettes?
Well, as you know, the Tobacco Prevention and Control Act did give us the authority to extend oversight of tobacco products beyond what was specifically mentioned in the original legislation through what we now call a deeming rule, and we've been working to propose a deeming rule which would actually give us officially the authority to oversee e-cigarettes, which we don't currently have. But we think that's very important. But we also think that any regulatory decision-making that we undertake should be based on good, solid scientific data. And towards that end, we have actually made some very significant investments in research to help us better understand this important tobacco product area, including grants to a number of academic institutions and creating centers for tobacco science research, and funding with partners in government, particularly the NIH, to undertake a major longitudinal study to better understand behaviors and also potential toxicities and other impacts of different kinds of tobacco product use. So we are very actively engaged. As you note, it is a debate within the public health community and beyond in terms of what is the role of e-cigarettes. But I think they're very much in the marketplace today. I think FDA should have some tools for oversight, and we need to work in a science-driven way on what is then the appropriate regulatory approach.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think many of us share that same mission, and we just look, I think, to your guidance as to how the public can be aware of maybe some less harmful alternatives that if the FDA were to issue some guidance there that you intend to do, it appears, I think that would go a long way to giving guidance to folks in the country who aren't sure yet. So we appreciate your efforts in that regard. I've had some concerns from, just on the topic of smoking, I guess. I've had some concerns from local mom and pop cigar shops. They're very concerned about pending regulations that may come forward that would bring cigars into the tobacco products the FDA would regulate, and many of them are concerned it may actually put them out of business. Can you speak to that a little bit and your efforts to ensure that we understand maybe some unique natures of some of these local folks that are in all of our districts?
Well, with respect to cigars, that would be part of the deeming rule that we would be hopefully putting forward for public comment very soon. And certainly we have heard a variety of concerns as we've been shaping this proposed rule about aspects of cigars, including premium cigars in particular. But I think that our responsibility is to address a set of critical public health concerns, looking at the context of what is being used and how it's being used. We believe that, again, it is very appropriate for FDA, in the context of the authorities that Congress has given us for oversight of tobacco products, to take that on. But then we need to work in a systematic way in terms of what it looks like and how it's implemented.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Pingree?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for being here today and for the work that you do on behalf of American consumers. I have a somewhat unusual question, I think, but one that I've been hearing a lot about from farmers in Maine, as well as our beer brewers. So there was a newspaper report last week that the FDA has proposed a new rule under FSMA that threatens a partnership between farmers and beer brewers that have been going back hundreds of years. It sort of works like this. The brewers, make the beer, and as a byproduct, there are barrels full of heavy, wet, spent grains which have some of the sugars and proteins extracted during the brewing process. There's no real usefulness in the spent grains for the brewer, so they generally give them to nearby farmers who use the spent grains as feed for the cows. If the brewers didn't give away the spent grains, they'd end up in a landfill, a financial burden to the brewer as well as an environmental cost. It's kind of a handshake agreement that strengthens our communities and is a good economic win-win for everybody. One example in my state, and I particularly love the name of this farmer, his name is Norm Justice. He takes all of the grain, the spent grain from Allagash Brewing Company, which I hope you've all had a Allagash beer sometime, and he feeds it not only to his own beef cattle, but distributes it to other dairy farmers around the state who feed literally thousands of head of cattle with it. When the supply of spent grains runs low, then they have to buy very expensive feed, particularly for us, because most of it comes from the Midwest. So this partnership, which has existed as long probably as agriculture and beer have existed, appears to be under attack in this rule. The proposed rule is aimed at ensuring the safety of animal feed for animals consuming the food and ensuring the safety of animal food for humans handling the food, particularly pet food. So this would require the brewers to dry it, to package it, to analyze the spent grains, all doing this without ever touching it with human hands. So I know that we all want very safe food for our pets. I understand the importance of that rule. We all want safe food for our livestock. But to us, this rule seems that's kind of gotten absurd in this particular area. One of the farmers mentioned in this particular article in the Bangor Daily News, his name was Jack Perry of Fairview Farm, said he relies on spent grain that he receives from the Gagan Brewing Company, and he wouldn't be able to stay in business, which, as you know, is very tough for our dairy farmers if he wasn't able to do this. The process of beer producing is already very heavily regulated to ensure that the beverage is safe for people to drink. I'm not really sure how we can say that these grains are good enough to produce something for human consumption, and then on the other side, it's not safe enough to feed a cow. So it's very hard to explain this to my constituents or my dairy farmers. So is there any evidence with the FDA that a cow has become sick after eating spent grains? We have so many legitimate concerns for food safety, which everyone is working very hard on. Why are we focusing on this particular rule? Can we talk about this?
Well, thank you, and let me begin by thanking you for, I understand you were very helpful when our team came up to Maine to meet with various producers and farmers, and that you actually stayed through the sessions, and I know that they found it very, very useful as
Great,
part of
thank
our
you.
outreach efforts. I actually have heard about the issues
I'm sure you're
that
hearing
you
from
were
brewers
describing,
from
although
everywhere.
not with quite so much color and detail. And you know, I think it's one of those examples of something where there is a reasonable solution that can be found, and where we certainly understand why it makes economic and sustainable agriculture sense to look towards these kinds of approaches. And we think that it can be taken up. You know, we do plan, as you may or may not know, to reopen comment in some targeted areas of particular concern. We think this can be taken up in that context, and I hope we can find, you know, a meaningful, viable solution.
Well, I'm sure that you'll receive a lot of comments. I did know you're reopening the comment period, and I guess my request would be that you consider a general exemption that just protects this partnership and looks at this differently. Oh, hello there. Nice to see you here. Sorry. Anyway, so looking at this a little bit differently as you're considering anything else. I'll just take another quick second if I can. I do have a lot of concerns about a whole other area, and we probably won't get through this entire question, but I do think that the FDA should be much more worried about antibiotics in animal feed. That, I think, is a very different kind of topic. It just seems to me that, given CDC estimates that say that many people, I think it's 20-some thousand people, die every year in America from antibiotic-resistant infections, we just know that there's an enormous amount of concern around the impact of using antibiotics in animal feed. How do you plan to document compliance with your new voluntary guidelines on this? Will you be collecting more detailed antibiotic use data than is provided by the annual Animal Drug User-Free Act reports? I'd love to get in a dialogue with this about you again. I'm almost out of time, so we may have to take this up later. But
well, I think we are making real progress, and the voluntary approach, while I understand many wished it had been mandatory, is, I think, already demonstrating value. The 90-day period for companies to come back to us about what their approaches and commitment would be ended, and I think it's actually in the paper today about, you know, we've achieved 99.6 or something, maybe it's even 96% of the products and the manufacturers have agreed to pursue the removal of these products for, you know, growth promotion, non-judicious use purposes. That needs to then be combined with our veterinary feed directive, which will, you know, really make it clear that any other uses for treatment or prevention have to be done under the oversight of a veterinarian, that records will have to be kept, and we will have the ability to monitor that to ensure compliance. I think will really give us an important set of new tools and opportunities to really advance what is a very important issue, frankly, for both animal and human health.
absolutely. Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Dr. Hamburg. I understand that Congressman not only had broached this topic earlier, but I want to return to it, please, and focus the remarks on this Cellular Tissue and Gene Therapies Advisory Committee, which has work related to the mitochondrial transfer technologies. Apparently, this hearing last month addressed scientific and technical consideration related to these technologies, in particular maternal spindle transfer and pronuclear transfer. I understand that researchers are pressing forward with this technique for in human trials, which has currently only been done on monkeys, with the goal of advancing the replacement of defective genetic material. Now, the press in recent weeks has raised a number of concerns about the danger of this science, namely the development and promotion of genetically modified human beings with the potential for unknown, unintended, and permanent consequences for future generations of Americans. One quote from a professor of neurobiology is this: "The creation of 3 parent embryos is not an innocuous medical treatment. It is a macabre form of eugenic human cloning, in which a human being with a medical condition is killed and his or her parts are used to create a new human being with an improved biological state." Clearly, there are consequences here, and frankly, these scenarios scare people, and I would be very worried if it didn't scare people. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about the potential risk involved with these techniques.
Well, this is a emerging technology that, of course, builds on advances in science and recognizes, you know, what is a serious disease condition. But as you point out, it raises many important issues that go beyond just scientific capability. The meeting that we held was really one of just beginning a discussion about research that has been underway and trying to deepen understanding of what this technique is about, et cetera. But we are very mindful that it raises a whole set of other issues. And while we don't think that we are the appropriate agency or entity to delve more deeply into the ethical issues, we are committed to partnering with other entities to examine those issues, and also, of course, to engage in a broader conversation with the American public and, of course, policymakers and leaders, including Congress. But it is something that is under discussion and under study, not just in this country, but in other countries. And I think, you know, that we need to have these important discussions about the science and the ethics and
Well,
the law.
I would suggest to you respectfully that scientific discovery is not a higher value than ethical discovery, and the two should be interdependent upon one another. Do you have an ethics committee at the FDA?
We do have ethicists at the FDA, and we do certainly address issues of biomedical research ethics, and also, of course, the ethics of patient safety and protection through a number of different committees and activities.
Would formalizing a structure such as an ethics committee within your agency be helpful, a helpful policy change?
Well, we feel very strongly that on this issue and on others, that it really needs to be a much broader conversation, that decisions shouldn't be made just within the walls of FDA on something like this.
Well, I agree with that, but
Yeah.
I'm suggesting, well, maybe you already have it, but a formalization of that process might be prudent.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I said, we have for different kinds of purposes, we have different sort of constellations of trained ethicists and committees or advisory groups that help us with those issues. But I hear what your question is, and I think it's worth taking it back for discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Valadao.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Hamburg, the FDA collects hundreds of millions of dollars in user fees from manufacturers and device makers. In fact, user fees are nearing parity with federal appropriated dollars. While not federal taxpayer dollars, this committee still has a responsibility to ensure proper oversight of how those funds are being used. Frankly, we need transparency. Commissioner Hamburg, will you commit to providing Appropriations Committee a detailed spending plan within each account by program, project, and activity, including a description of new regulatory activities, personnel classification, hiring, and spending plans, including the spending plans to be carried out by all user fee supported centers at FDA? This information will provide the Congress with greater visibility into how user fees and appropriated funds are going to be used by the FDA in advance of program expenditures.
Well, we certainly are eager to work with you. This is a program that's important, and all the different user fee programs have expanded significantly in recent years. They do come with a lot of reporting requirements, including regular financial reports. I just signed off on a number of them for the user fees that are going to review at HHS and will come up to you very shortly. So I think we don't want to duplicate existing efforts, but let's work together to see what kinds of information is already available and what additional information you might need.
I appreciate that. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Ensuring farmers have access to multiple modes of action to address weed resistance is very important. One way to help farmers is to ensure that they have access to new herbicide-tolerant crops. I understand USDA has not yet deregulated products that it will give farmers some additional ammunition against weeds, and EPA continues to wait for USDA's deregulation decisions before taking action on herbicide approvals. Yesterday, I asked USDA's research, education, and economic leaders about the importance of funding research projects only to turn around and fight the very outcomes of that research. Can you help me understand why it's taking so long for these helpful tools to get out in the marketplace? Are USDA and EPA efficiently coordinating the deregulation of these and other herbicide-tolerant crops? If so, what has changed about the process that this committee can qualify as an improvement?
I apologize, but I'm not sure whether this is an FDA-specific issue.
Well, the EPA is in the other room, so I've been bouncing back and forth, and I know the EPA is struggling, and they're waiting for a process to allow some of the approvals to go through, and figured I'd have a chance to talk to you because there is a little bit. FDA does have oversight over some of the issues when it comes to products used in our food and.
Well, we do have responsibility to address pesticide levels in food products, and also particularly with imported foods, but sometimes domestically produced foods as well, unapproved pesticides that are used in food products. But I think that the specific issue that you're asking about is really a USDA issue. But again, I will confer with our experts in the area, and we will follow up with your office to see if there's some.
I appreciate that. We'll be in
do
touch
to
on that.
Clarify.
I think I have time for one more. Dr. Hamburger, last year, the agency issued a draft guidance on bioequivalent standards for, and I'm going to struggle with this one, ophthalmic emulsion, which would require no human studies. However, some of your own scientists have said products like this are not absorbed into the bloodstream and should require more careful study. This guidance concerns me, and it reminds me of what is done with complex iron products. Because it seems to be a public health is subject to ad hoc approval standards, they haven't been vetted by the public or other stakeholders through any other open comment process. It concerns me all the more because in the meantime, you can use this draft guidance to approve generic products that may not be equivalent. I understand several physician groups have raised significant scientific concerns with your draft guidance for these eye products. I'll have more specific question on this topic for you to answer for the record. But given the level of concern, can you tell me the status is of the guidance today?
I think that if you would give me permission, we should get back to you on all of that because I am not familiar with that specific guidance and want to be able to give you a complete answer.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. One of your 7 proposed rules under the Food Safety Modernization Act deals with produce safety. Beyond the controversy surrounding how the rules will be enforced based on the size of the grower, there are some fundamental concerns about FDA's presence actually on the farm. The ag community has a long history of working with the government, but that has been with directly USDA. FDA has previously stated that we'll try to use State Department of Agriculture or third-party audits to help with the enforcement. But farmers and ranchers are concerned that FDA has the potential to be heavy-handed in dealing with them and a group they've never regulated or dealt with before. Question I'd have to you, does the agency envision FDA employees conducting the actual enforcement on the farm?
Well, I think it is a program that is under development, and we certainly see the partnership with states as well as with agriculture as a critical part of the success of the full implementation of the program. we have undertaken a really massive effort to reach out to the agricultural community and growers, large and small, to understand their concerns, and certainly we've heard some of the concerns that you've expressed. We will have a presence on the farm, but we see really that this is a program that will best be implemented through partnerships and building on systems that are already in place and working, expanding them. And, one of the areas of critical funding as we look at fiscal year 15 and 16 is the ability to provide some resources to states so that they can strengthen and extend and restructure their program activities so that they can work more effectively with us to implement the goals of FSMA.
So you don't necessarily see FDA directly on the.
Well, we will have some presence on the farms,
okay.
But I certainly don't intend it to be heavy-handed,
Well,
and I certainly think it will be played out in a partnership with partners that are more familiar to growers, and I hope that through our outreach efforts, we also are becoming more familiar to the grower community.
So they would be, if these FDA employees there, they would be fair, they would be balanced, transparent. So you can assure us of that.
I certainly hope so, and if they're not, I want to hear about it.
Okay. Let me turn to another issue that I think is very intriguing. We were yesterday. We had the research with issues before this with FDA yesterday regarding the Chinese. Today we've got a little bit of a similar issue. The New York Times and Bloomberg published an article last month that exposed a real troubling development in the FDA's foreign inspection of food and drugs in China. There was a February 14th article in the New York Times that said nearly all antibiotics, steroids, and many other life-saving drugs are now made exclusively in China. Chinese exports have grown from 2.3 billion tons in 2003 to 4.1 billion tons in 2012. Despite this committee's increase for funding for inspectors in China and in a government agreement negotiated with Vice President Biden and the Chinese government to allow 20 inspectors in China, most of those inspectors are still here in the United States from the information that I've been given. How many FDA inspectors are currently working in China on food and drug inspections, and how many are awaiting clearance from the Chinese government?
Well, we are trying, as you note, to expand our efforts in China. We do have an office now with we have 3 offices in China: Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. And there are 13 staff, 8 that are American citizens and 5 that are Chinese, but working for us. And we hope to expand that with, I think it's 17 more inspectors, 10 more for drugs and 7 more for food. And we've been working with the Chinese government to get those approvals, and in December, Vice President Biden and his team were able to finalize those arrangements, and we're now trying to identify the staff to go over, which I have to say is an additional challenge for us, because not everyone who works at the FDA wants to pick up themselves or with their families and move to China or India or whatever for a number of years to work. But we believe that this expansion in China will be very appropriate. They're actually not the largest exporter of drugs currently to the United States. That's India. And I recently had the opportunity to visit India and I think undertake some important work. But the fact that more and more of the active pharmaceutical ingredients in drugs that are used here, or the drugs themselves, are being made overseas is a real concern, and it has led to us, really redoing and rethinking many of our programs, and has really required us to become global in our reach.
You said there's about 17 awaiting approval at this point?
They're not we're now identifying people that will take on those important new jobs. So it's in process.
So how many FDA inspectors are currently working in China today?
Well, as I said, we've got 13 people over there. Not all of them are doing inspections. We also, you need to understand, though, it's not only if you're based in China do you do inspections. We have teams of people who go over to do inspections in China and in other places as well. And we're also increasingly working with our regulatory counterparts from other parts of the world to share information, including on inspections, so that we can, again, extend our reach.
So as far as on-the-ground inspectors, you have maybe 10 or less full-time inspectors?
A limited number of on-the-ground, day-to-day inspectors in China that are living there. At any given time, we may have other inspectors who have been sent over to do targeted inspections. But it's a huge, huge challenge. The number of facilities overseas, not just for drugs, but for devices and for food production, is large and growing. And this is, one of the reasons why, we cannot be standing still. We do have to keep expanding to address these new challenges.
According to that New York Times article on February the 14th, it says nearly all antibiotics, steroids, and many other life-saving drugs are made exclusively in China. Is that true?
I don't recall seeing that article, and I don't know where that would have come from. But
do you disagree with that, or?
Well, I'd like to see the article to see what it was saying, but there is no question that a very large percentage of the active pharmaceutical ingredients in many drugs are coming from China and from India, and that many of the finished drugs are also coming from other countries. But with respect to the specifics in that article, that seems not entirely accurate to me, but I'd like to see the article before I would give further comment. But it's a real concern.
What are the reasons that China gives for delaying our inspectors over there?
Well, I think that they were initially a little bit reluctant, but those issues were worked through. It is a different regulatory model than they're used to, and other countries also have been a little bit resistant to the notion of us having a physical on-site presence in their countries. But in fact, it has proven to be very beneficial for all. I think we've been able, by being physically there, to engage in a much more direct and productive way, both with the companies involved and with our counterpart regulators. And so I think it is demonstrating its value, and I think we're making real progress.
Do you have any idea when these inspectors that you have that are waiting to go over there, when they may get approval?
Well, we are identifying people as we speak to fill those positions, and
any idea when those might be filled?
We want it as soon as possible, but as I said, it's not completely straightforward to identify the right FDA employees to go over to fill those roles.
Does China currently conduct inspections here in the United States?
I think they've done a few, but we are much more aggressive at the present time in terms of our international presence and inspections.
So from your understanding, there are some inspectors here from China?
Well, not based here. They do some limited inspections, and I think.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield for a question?
Sure.
Why has there been such a significant shift in the components of drug production to China and India?
Well, that is a very good question. I mean, part of it is, I think, that some of the resources, some of the chemicals, et cetera, actually, are in those regions of the world. But I think it's a question of identifying a niche and building it up, and really responding to a changing global marketplace.
Mr. Farr.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask?
Sure, go ahead.
Just
quickly.
Because I think it's a great question. I don't know if it has to do with any of our trade efforts. To be honest with you, WTO and so forth. That I believe that it may be the case, but I think it's worthwhile taking a look at what that means. Not because of what has happened in the past with WTO, but what the future agreements would portend in this regard as well. But the other piece of this, Mr. Chairman, and your point is, what kind of constraints do the Chinese put on the freedom or the access of our inspectors or our staff or our personnel that are there? And I don't know, do they have restrictions? And are we subject to freedom of movement here, you know, in terms of our being able to, you know, to accomplish the goal that you've
Well, I would say one great thing that the Food Safety Modernization Act did was actually give us the authority to refuse entry of foods that are produced in a facility if we haven't been allowed to go in and undertake an inspection.
Sure. We'd like to make sure that is carried out. Mr. Farr.
Thank you. Continuing on the theme of inspections, I'd like to bring it back to the domestic side. I'd like to thank you again for coming out to California and walking the fields of the Salinas Valley and looking at the leafy green marketing order, which was essentially a initiative by the industry to do the protocols necessary to guarantee that the products are safe and so on, way ahead of the federal government. In fact, when Rosa DeLauro was chair of this committee, she praised the industry for being ahead of the federal government, and California and through the industry was the first in the nation. That you came all the way out there is significant, but also today, one of my colleagues from California, Mr. Valadeo, has brought his father here as a farmer. And he's a dairy farmer and especially crop farmer. And I'm sure you'd rather have your son back home milking cows than being here today. But thank you for coming. Well, there's an old adage in Washington that says that if you like sausages or laws, you should never see either of them being made. And today you're seeing how we make laws out here in our great country. But back to you, Dr. Hamburg. What I'd really like to, you know, as we move with FSMA, which came about after the leafy green marketing order was created, and there was also a good agricultural practices known as GAP. And if you followed those protocols up until we had FSMA, you were fine. Now that we have a national and trying to create laws, that what we don't want is the duplication or more regulation, essentially, and what we were trying to do is get a waiver or get an understanding. In fact, I wrote a letter to you on November 13th last year with most of the California delegation signing it, asking if we could enter into an MOU with the leafy green marketing group in California and use that as the rule. And so what I'd like to know is there going to be more duplication? Is there going to be a separate audit program? How do we incorporate or we exempt the GAP certified and leafy green marketing orders certified from additional or duplicative regulations under FSMA?
Well, we certainly don't want to create a system that adds duplication of effort and more layers of activity, but rather reflects best practices and, you know, a fairly uniform approach across the nation. Our hope is that, and I think there's every reason to believe that what the companies that you're describing and that are doing as part of the LGMA and the GAP program, you know, in many ways what they've done is foundational to some of the thinking, in fact, about how best to approach produce and preventive control. So I think it will all come together in a system. I'm not sure that we need to do MOUs or waivers to achieve that. It's a question of what are the practices and if the practices conform with the standards.
Well, from what USDA is doing, those practices in California are higher than what the farmers and the rest of the nation are willing to accept.
So you know, what I'm saying is I think what they're doing will conform with these standards and expectations.
So we don't, I mean, we will try to not have to do more or have separate audit in a California audit that they've created and a federal audit. That's just ridiculous.
No, and we agree, and we're not looking to build levels of bureaucracy one upon another.
Well, lastly, I'd just like to ask you, because I mentioned it in the opening remarks, that I think it would be interesting for us to understand what happened when we went into this shutdown and sequestration, and what the impact was on opportunity lost for your agency and sort of lessons learned. Could you give the committee kind of your feelings about that as somebody who had to steer the ship through it all, and what would you tell Congress about the unintended consequences of our inability to come to provide leadership?
Well, certainly the government shutdown and sequestration, did have an impact on our work and also on morale within the agency. We were fortunate that because of user fees, we were able to continue critical work in some areas that otherwise might have been compromised. But we were very surprised, as you know, that both our budget authority dollars and our user fee dollars were subject to sequestration. And that, took an unexpected additional toll, and we're very appreciative of the efforts of Congress to help us restore the sequestered user fees, which had been, of course, carefully negotiated with industry around a set of critical activities and performance goals, and nobody had expected them to be taken away. I would say that the impact of sequestration and the government shutdown was, of course, to slow us in our ability to stand up certain important new programs and to continue efforts in some important areas, but that were deemed of sufficient public health emergency status to continue in the context of the government shutdown. There also was a huge impact on morale. I mean, everyone at FDA likes to think that they are working on incredibly critical public health priorities, and we are every day. And so for people who are so dedicated to their work, to be sent home was devastating. I would say it also had some impact on our ability to recruit people. I was in the midst of one high-level recruitment, and the person looked at this and said, why would I want to leave the job I love and enjoy in academia for the uncertainty of government work?
Mr. Nunley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hamburg, I've got some questions and concerns about the FDA's recent proposed rule change on the labeling of generic drugs, allowing the generic drug manufacturers to change their label without FDA approval. I am concerned that it may be in conflict with existing statute. So just tell me, how did you explain how you decided to come up with these guidelines?
Well, I think there obviously was a decision, the Pleva versus Mensing decision, that shone a light on the fact that there was a differential response in terms of findings of potentially important safety concerns in products that were in use by American consumers, brand versus generics. And with the brand companies being required to, when they learned of potentially important safety information, to immediately reflect that in labeling and information for consumers and healthcare providers. But the generics being dependent on the brand making the initial change, and then sort of a trickle down to the generic drugs. But in a world where 80% of the prescriptions in the country are for generic drugs, and where increasingly often, as generic drugs come into the marketplace, brands may actually stop manufacturing that drug altogether so that there is no brand drug, it creates a system where patients and their healthcare providers can't get access to potentially important safety information in the most expeditious way. So we felt that it was important to put forward a proposed rule that would address this and really create a more uniform protection for patients that would reflect emerging safety concerns. And as you probably know, that went out for comment, and we've received a lot of comments. The period just ended. We're reviewing those comments, and again, you know, a large volume of response and very thoughtful, considered responses. So we are, you know, taking that all into account as we think about what needs to be done going forward.
So do you have the resources to implement this rule?
I believe we would have the resources to implement it.
Let me interject here just a second. This voting schedule has been on and off, and we're not sure exactly what's going on. I understand there is a vote on the floor, but we're probably going to have a few more minutes. Why don't we go down to try to get another round in that we could limit each person to one question?
I'm through.
So, and then that way we can try to get another round before we go vote. So, who's next? Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much. It's come to my attention, Dr. Hamburg, that many small and medium-sized grocery store chains and fast food establishments such as pizza chains have expressed concerns about the FDA's labeling requirements for restaurants, similar retail food establishments, and vending machines. Proposed rule FDA 2011 F0172, which implements the menu labeling provisions of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. These establishments say that while the FDA's initiatives to create a national nutrition standard and require retail food establishments to disclose nutrition information are good for the public, they argue that this one-size-fits-all rule would be onerous and cost prohibitive. So what is the status of this proposed rule, and what is FDA doing to balance the public health and economic viability of retail food establishments, many of which are small businesses?
Well, as you know, we've been working on the menu labeling rule for a very long time, and have gotten lots of feedback and input from all the various stakeholders. We are moving towards a final rule. It does only apply to restaurants and restaurant-like establishments that are chains of 20 or more. But we have been trying very hard to find a system that is meaningful for public health, but also truly implementable and economically viable. So we hope that final rule will be coming forward. You know, I'm always loath to give a date, but you know, certainly within this year, but sooner than that is my goal.
I'm always, I try to hold up proper regulatory procedures and criteria to three simple standards. One, that the regulations be subjected to a cost-benefit analysis. Two, that they be based in sound science. And three, that they make common practical sense. So I hope that when it comes to these small businesses, that you will take that into account as you implement the rule, because we really don't want to overburden businesses that are just not equipped to manage.
Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hamburg, I want to follow up on questions Mr. Nunley was asking you. I wrote a letter to you on September 20th of 2013, which I appreciate a reply I got in January, and I thank you for your detailed reply. I think in your cost estimates for the generic labeling rules, we have missed an important component, and that is the exposure to new liability, new costs that would be associated with this expansion in terms of litigation costs. Have you fully taken into consideration those litigation costs and the expansion of liability? And in developing this rule, have you had an opportunity to negotiate, or I guess not negotiate, I guess visit with members of the industry and members who support this? Because I know you met with the trial lawyers in developing this rule. What's their interest in this, and have you also met with industry members in proposing this rule?
Well, have been many, many discussions, and it has been an open rulemaking process with the period of comment just closing, as I mentioned. We certainly did get comments on the issues that you raised. It's an ongoing rulemaking process, though, and so, we're looking at all the comments and
if I
the
might,
need
Ms.
for additional analysis.
If I might, just in your letter, we specifically asked if you met with any groups. You say you generally do not participate in dialogue during the development of proposed rules, that you don't do that yet. You did meet and did have a meeting with the chief counsel, your chief counsel, with the American Association for Justice, and that was the one group you met with. I just found that odd that in your letter you would say that was the only group you met with.
We've certainly had meetings and input from the Generic Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association and others as well, talking about some of these broad issues, and then the comment period has given the opportunity for a lot of input on these issues as well.
Mr. Lauro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick point on China. Someone should take a look at the e-cigarettes that are coming from China. Slit it open and see what's in it if you want to find something that is just outrageous. And there is no regulation. The deeming rule, please, as soon as you can. My question has to do with industry commitment in post-market studies. And that has to, and I wrote in February about responsibilities to consumers that come from drugs that are approved using this alternative approval process. I think it's important that the public has access to post-market evaluation data for the drugs that are undergoing this approval. You have to have consumers and physicians who can make informed decisions. I'm there on a need to get safe, effective drugs to market as quickly as possible, particularly for vulnerable populations. FDA has several regulatory pathways that allow you to facilitate the introduction of new drugs. The shift, however, in regulatory burden from pre-market evaluation to post-market environment should not come, in my view, with a potential sacrifice to the consumer. So my questions are, the moment the drug hits the market, average amount of time required for usable results for post-market studies to be made available to the public. What are your requirements and criteria for post-market surveillance? That time frame to look at it, how quickly do we get that back so it becomes meaningful in terms of physicians and consumers? What are the penalties? What are the enforcement mechanisms if these folks fail to conduct post-market studies in a timely manner or do not provide appropriate or meaningful data about safety or efficacy?
Well, that's a big question. In the interest of time, I won't try to answer all the elements.
And I would like to
that we have different systems for post-market monitoring, surveillance, studies. All of that is very important. Happy to either in a briefing or in a written response go into more detail, but it's crucial that we follow these drugs over the course of their lifetime and their real-world experience.
My experience with post-market surveillance has been it's spotty and it doesn't happen. So I want to sit down with you and go over that. I don't want to take any more of my colleagues' time. Thank you.
Mr. Fortenberry, one question.
Yes, Doctor, a real quick point. On Valentine's Day, I went to buy my children some candy at a drugstore. I had a very hard time finding anything made in America, which was pretty shocking to me. So I bought this afterward to show you, made in China. I didn't give it to my children, just to make the point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I think Ranking Member Farr talked to you a little bit about FSMA, and I do want to thank Michael Taylor and all the others who came to the New England states and really focused on the issues that our farmers have been extremely concerned about. And, of course, I continue to hear from them about this. I greatly appreciate that you've given a lot more time to working on this, and I just want to emphasize how important it is that we have a system that both works really well for food safety but doesn't eliminate many of the great things that are happening with local food and farming. So I just want to sort of emphasize, and then I'll let you go. The comment period will kind of coincide with the growing period. for farmers across the country, and I just want to make sure that you undertake some effort that they can be able to communicate, and that we don't also issue rules in the middle of the growing season, and we keep their considerations in mind.
Well, that's an important point. I guess different things have different growing seasons, so there may never be a
Oh yeah, I
time of
forgot about
year,
those
but,
Californians.
But you know,
You don't need to
point
give me a
taken,
lengthy answer
point
as
taken.
others here, and
Yeah.
I just want to say we're going to continue to work
Okay.
closely with you on
And
that.
we will continue to work closely with you, and really have appreciated your interest and the commitment that you've shown.
And yes. Oh, let me finish this round and we'll come back. Yeah, and now before going to Mr. Valadao, I understand we have a special guest with us today. Mr. Valadao's father is with us, so we want to recognize you and thank you for being here. And Mr. Valadao, go ahead.
Thank you for that. And my dad's probably not happy now, but Commissioner Hamburg, I want to ask you about the portion of your budget that deals directly with food regulation. In fiscal year 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015 budget requests for your agency's food safety work was made up of primarily increasing funds from user fees. I know this issue was discussed earlier, but you seem to indicate the food industry may have indicated support for you. You are suggesting people pay a fee to receive no benefit in return. That sounds like a tax. What you are proposing this year is a $69 million food facility registration fee and $169 million import inspection fee. Companies paying the government merely for existing or for the privilege of being a food processor, producer, or manufacturer. I have a letter here from nearly 60 groups that includes food, farm, feed, retailers, distributors, and business groups who would oppose such taxes on their consumers. These groups don't seem to be indicating support. How do you justify this fee that will raise prices for our consumers? And how can you say if the industry has indicated support if these groups all oppose?
Well, I do think, first of all, that there would be value added in terms of the programs we'd be able to put in place and our ability to more effectively respond to a set of really important concerns, both to make sure that we have a system that's focused on preventing problems before they occur, which matters to industry just as it matters to the health of the public. And also, we've been talking a lot about the challenges of globalization, the fact that, you know, we have products coming from countries all over the world in ways that just simply weren't happening before, and we need to find a way to build an import safety system for foods that reflects that new reality. So I think that there would be, you know, they would see value for their money. In fact, we shaped aspects of the user fee proposal based on many discussions with stakeholders, including industry, in terms of where they saw particular potentials for value. Now, that doesn't mean that all companies would support this. It doesn't mean, as has been noted, that we're likely to see user fees authorized this year or the next. But I think it's an important discussion to continue to have, and I think that if you look at the experience with user fees on the pharmaceutical and medical device side, they would tell you that while they didn't necessarily come to the table eagerly to put money out to support some of the critical programs, that they can see the benefits of those investments over time.
Thank you. We have one last question. She's Miss.
Just for
got
the
a
record,
Dolores got one quick question.
It dovetails here the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. 11 countries, influx particularly of seafood. Vietnam has been stopped 206 times at the border for a product that has been proclaimed contaminated, a filthy, decomposing product. Does your budget, if we move forward with the TPP, quite frankly, as the administration wants to do, what would you need? Does the proposal in front of us today prepare for that kind of increased volume coming in to the U.S. in terms of safety, and that's the inspection issue? You can get back to me on that. But I think it's a very relevant question in terms of where we are going on these trade agreements and what kind of burden that puts on you, whether it's Peru, whether it is a product from China because it's transshipped from Malaysia, and what is coming in from Vietnam. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman,
you.
very, very much.
Thank you for being here today. Let me
you.
just, in concluding, say the menu labeling issue is something that is, we're hearing a lot about, so we would appreciate your concern and your focus on that, and as I know you will, and just concerns that it causes a lot of businesses out there. But regardless, thank you for being here today for the last 2.5 hours, and we appreciate all of your work here and all of you been here, and the committee is adjourned.
Thank you.